They said it was just an old tale, a soldier, a charm, 3 wishes. But stories don't survive generations unless something real keeps breathing inside them. What entered the house that night was not just a visitor, but a shadow carried in a soldier's coat pocket. And once it sat on the table, curled like a dead thing, the room never truly felt warm again. Outside the cottage, the night was heavy with rain. Not a storm, but the kind of slow, steady downpour that softened the edges of the world. The trees had blurred into shadows, and the road was nothing more than a winding trail of wet stone and old silence. The wind had a strange weight that night. It didn't howl. It whispered, dragging across the moors like something blind and searching. Inside, the cottage was quiet, not empty, but settled. Worn books leaned against one another on sagging shelves. The fire in the hearth hissed and glowed, painting flickering light across the walls. A chessboard sat on the table, and a kettle steamed gently in the small kitchen beyond. Mr. White sat across from his son, Herbert, staring at the chess pieces. He looked distracted, his brow furrowed, lips pursed. He made a move, frowned, then leaned back with a grunt. "You're going to lose, father," Herbert said, one eyebrow lifted in playful judgment. "And you're too proud of winning," Mr. White replied, rubbing his chin as he scanned the board again. "Give an old man a chance. Will you? You had chances. About 5 moves ago." From the fireplace, Mrs. White spoke up, not looking from her knitting. "You spend more time worrying about that road than you do your strategy." Mr. White turned toward the window. The road curved sharply past the gate before dipping into the trees. "It's that bend," he muttered. "Dangerous in this weather. I told him he'd have trouble finding the house. Should have met him in town." Herbert leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "He's a soldier, Dad. He's probably survived things far worse than wet cobblestones." A distant sound interrupted them, soft, slow, distinct. 3 knocks. Mr. White rose slowly and moved to the door. As he opened it, a gust of damp air pressed inward, carrying the scent of distant smoke and the wet musk of earth. On the doorstep stood a man hunched against the rain, tall, thick-shouldered. His greatcoat glistening, droplets slipping from the brim of his soaked hat. "Sergeant Major Morris," Mr. White said. And despite the unease in his voice, there was genuine warmth in his eyes. "Come in, man, come in out of that damned storm." The visitor stepped inside, nodding once in thanks. His presence seemed to shift the weight of the room. He moved with the slowness of a man who had walked too many roads and seen too many things. His eyes scanned the room, not casually, but as if confirming nothing had changed, or perhaps everything had. They led him to the fire and offered brandy. He declined food but accepted the chair. He sat like someone used to carrying too much weight, in his pack, in his bones, and in his mind. For a while, the room softened. Stories passed around like old photographs, memories of places far and strange. Morris told them just enough to stir wonder but not enough to satisfy it. He'd been to villages where the stars never moved, through jungles that sang with invisible voices, across deserts that whispered names no one living could remember. Mrs. White refilled his glass and smiled gently. "You've lived more in 10 years than most men do in a lifetime." He didn't smile back. He only nodded, slowly. Herbert was the first to break the silence that followed. "Tell us something strange," he said. "Something you couldn't explain. A tale from the edge of the map." The soldier looked down into his drink. His hand circled the rim of the glass, once, then twice. When he looked up, there was a flicker of hesitation in his face. But only for a moment. Without a word, He reached into the deep pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, dark object. He set it on the table. It didn't make a sound, but it changed the air. It looked like a shriveled animal's paw. The fingers, or claws, were clenched tightly, as if in mid-grasp. It was brownish, dry, and leathery, with a faint sheen like something half alive. Mrs. White flinched. "What on earth is that?" "A monkey's paw," Morris said quietly. "From India." Herbert laughed, but it sounded forced. "And it does something?" "It grants 3 wishes," said Morris. Mr. White leaned forward. "Like a genie?" "No," Morris said. "Not like a genie." There was something final in the way he said it. It was cursed, or enchanted. By a fakir in India. Old holy man. Wanted to show that fate rules our lives, and those who try to change it suffer beyond their imagination. "And you've used it?" Mr. White asked. Morris didn't answer at first. He looked back at the paw, and his jaw clenched faintly. "I have," he said. The fire crackled, and something in the shadows shifted, not visibly, but in feeling. Like the house itself was listening. Herbert sat back. "So, what did you wish for? A palace? Treasure? Immortality?" Morris's eyes didn't leave the paw. "It doesn't matter," he said. "The wishes came. But they don't come the way you think. They twist and distort." Mr. White chuckled nervously. "Surely you're not saying—" "I am," Morris interrupted. "And if you're smart, you'll burn it. Destroy it before it decides to answer someone else." Without another word, he stood suddenly and tossed the paw towards the fire. But Mr. White's hand snapped out and caught it mid-air. The room froze. Morris stared at him. "You don't want it," he said. "You think you do, but you don't. Burn it." "If it's real," Mr. White said. "Don't burn it." "That's exactly why it should be burned," Morris snapped. "It's dangerous." He turned to face them all, suddenly pale. "I've seen what it does. I've seen men lose everything. It brings nothing but sorrow." "Superstition," Mr. White said, still holding the paw. Morris stared at him for a long moment. "Wish for something trivial. Something small. But when it comes, and it will, remember what I said." He left soon after. No handshake. No goodbyes. He stepped into the rain without looking back, vanishing into the mist like a man returning to his curse. That night, the paw sat on the mantel, dry and lifeless. It looked like nothing more than an odd souvenir. But its shadow stretched longer than it should have. Herbert picked it up and turned it in his fingers. "What would you wish for, Mother?" Mrs. White smiled faintly. "I'd wish for the fire to burn warmer and the rain to stop." Herbert grinned. "I'd wish for fame. Maybe a yacht." Mr. White chuckled. "I'd wish for £200 to pay off the mortgage." "Then do it," Herbert said, half daring. They laughed, but it was a hollow kind of laughter. Mr. White took the paw, still amused, and held it loosely. "I wish for £200, he said aloud. The wind outside rose, just for a moment. And then the paw moved. It twisted. Not sharply, but enough. A small, sudden jerk, like a muscle contracting. Mr. White dropped it with a cry. "I felt it move," he whispered. "Probably just the tendons," Herbert said, though his voice held a thread of something else. "Old stories," Mrs. White said. But she didn't meet her husband's eyes. They went to bed early that night. The wind had grown louder. Something about it sounded different now, like it carried voices inside it. Not words. But something just beneath understanding. Mr. White lay awake for hours. He kept hearing things. A knock that never came. A footstep that didn't exist. And once, just once, he thought he saw something near the end of the hallway. Just a shape. Too tall. Too thin. He blinked, and it was gone. The next morning came too early. The rain had stopped. But the sky remained sullen, hanging low and gray above the cottage. Herbert whistled as he dressed to go for his work. The cheer in his voice felt forced today. "Off to the grind," he said, wrapping his scarf and heading for the door. He turned back and gave a small humorous smile. "Don't spend that money all at once." Mr. White smiled, but didn't reply. He was staring at the paw, which now rested in a bowl near the fireplace. It looked smaller in the daylight, less dangerous, more pathetic. But still, he couldn't bring himself to touch it again. Mrs. White waved Herbert off and turned to the kettle. "You're still thinking about it." "It moved," Mr. White said softly. "You saw it." "I saw you drop it and nothing else." He didn't respond. By noon, the clouds had begun to clear, but the heaviness inside the house hadn't lifted. It settled in the corners, in the pauses between conversation, in the strange feeling that nothing felt exactly as it should. Even the fire seemed unwilling to burn properly, flaring suddenly, then dying again, as though breathing in a rhythm not its own. They sat quietly after lunch. A newspaper lay unread. The tick of the clock seemed louder than usual. Mrs. White knit. Mr. White simply stared. Then, a knock. Not hurried. Not soft. 3 deliberate raps on the door. Mr. White rose and opened the door. A man stood on the step, hat in hand, shoulders squared, face solemn. His clothes marked him as a factory man, from the mill where Herbert worked. His mouth opened, then closed again. He cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. White." Mrs. White stepped into the doorway beside her husband. "Is something wrong?" she asked quickly. The man hesitated too long. "There's been an accident," he said. "At the mill." The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, all air sucked from the world. "What kind of accident?" she asked again, her voice smaller now. The man looked away. "One of the machines caught him." There was no pain. It was quick. She didn't scream. Not at first. She turned. Walked slowly to the chair near the fire, and sat. She didn't blink. She just stared. Mr. White's hand trembled against the doorframe. "He was just here," he said. "This morning. He was fine." "I know," the man said gently. "I know." He reached into his coat and brought out an envelope. "Our company, Ma and Megan's, asked me to deliver this compensation to you." Mr. White took it with numb fingers. The paper felt heavier than it should. He opened it. Inside it were exact £200. The same amount he had asked for. Not a penny more. Not a penny less. His breath caught. The man bowed slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, and left. The door closed behind him. The fire hissed, as if disturbed by the very shape of grief. Mr. White stared at the envelope. His lips moved, but no sound came. Mrs. White had not moved. Her hands were clenched in her lap. Her face had gone pale. "He was just here," she whispered. No one replied. The house held the silence. It would not let it go. Mr. White tried to speak, to say something to break the stillness, but his voice had deserted him. All he could do was sit. And stare. And hold that cursed envelope in his trembling fingers, like a proof of guilt. £200, pressed between stiff white paper. No wax seal. No explanation. No apology. Only the weight of the sum and the silence of regret that surrounded it, a silence that stretched long and breathless between the grieving hearts of a mother and a father. Mr. White turned the envelope over in his hands once. Then again. It felt heavy, not from money, but from meaning. A cruel kind of proof. As if the wish had been granted exactly, precisely, devastatingly. They buried Herbert on a cold and cloudy morning. The sky was gray and unmoving, as if even the sun didn't dare to shine that day. The priest spoke the usual words, but they felt empty, like he had said them too many times to too many families. They were just sounds now, not comfort. Herbert's coffin was made of dark wood. His name was written in shiny brass letters. There were no flowers. When the earth was shoveled over the coffin, the sound it made, a soft, heavy thud, seemed to echo in Mr. and Mrs. White's hearts. Mrs. White didn't cry. Not at the cemetery. Not on the walk home. Not even when the door of their house closed behind them. She just sat by the fire in silence, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes staring at the floor as if she could see through it, down into the cold ground where her son now lay. Mr. White stayed quiet too. He didn't know what to say. The wind pushed against the windows, as if trying to get in. The fire burned in the hearth, but the room still felt cold, too cold. And on the mantel above the fire, the monkey's paw sat, untouched. Still. Waiting. Waiting to fulfill another remaining 2 wishes. Mr. White had thought, once, to throw it into the fire, but something, fear, guilt, madness, had stopped him. That evening passed without conversation. The clock ticked, but time no longer seemed to matter. They did not eat. They did not sleep. And then, as night deepened and the wind quieted, Mrs. White stood up from her chair. Slowly. Deliberately. She turned to her husband, her voice rough from disuse. "That paw," she said. "Where is it?" He looked at her. The moment those words left her lips, he felt it, a low, crawling dread rising in his gut. His blood chilled. "It's on the mantel," he replied. She didn't blink and said, "Bring it to me." "No," he said suddenly, sharply. "You don't mean it." "I want my son back," she said. His voice shook. "He's been dead 10 days. I don't care," Mrs. White said. Her voice was steadier now. "I want him back." Mr. White reached toward the paw, tried to take it. "You don't know what you're saying." But she clutched it to her chest, eyes fierce. "You were the one who made the first wish. Now make the second." He stared at her. At the face that had once been filled with joy and laughter and now burned only with grief and desperation. "Do you really think he'll come back, as he was?" "I don't care how he comes back," she said. "He is our son." She stepped toward the paw. "We can bring him back. We can undo this." His hands clenched the armrests of the chair. "It doesn't work like that. You remember what Morris said about the fakir, the one who cursed this paw, he made it to show people not to interfere with fate." But Mrs. White didn't stop. "What does it matter now? We asked for money, and it came. We can ask for our son." "At what cost?" he said sharply, rising now. "Herbert is dead, and we have what we asked for. That was the price we had to pay." She turned to him, eyes wide and wild. "Then we make it right." But Mr. White's voice lowered to a whisper, as though the house itself might be listening. He said, "Fate is a thread. A line we walk without seeing. And when we pull on it knowingly, we don't know what we unravel." She shook her head. "I don't care. I just want him back." He stepped closer, voice trembling. "What if we call something else back, something that wasn't meant to return from the grave?" "It's wrong," he whispered. "Whatever comes back, won't be him." There was silence between them. A silence heavy with mourning, fear, and love twisted by desperation. Her hands hovered near the paw. "I'd rather see him again in ruin, than never again at all." Mr. White said nothing for a long time. But his eyes, old, worn, full of pain, looked at her like a man watching someone walk toward the edge of a cliff, unable to stop them. And then, she took the paw and pressed it into his hand. Wish him back. He looked down at it. It felt heavier now. Slowly, he closed his fingers around it. And with a voice full of dread, he said the words. I wish my son alive again. Mr. White gasped. The paw had again twitched in his hand. A sudden gust of wind rose outside. The fire blew sideways, sparks jumping. The lights flickered. The room plunged briefly into half-darkness, then steadied. But no sound came from outside. No footsteps. No knock. They waited. Hearts straining in their chests. But the house remained still. He'll come, she whispered. He heard me. He'll come. She stood by the door for an hour, waiting. But the night offered only wind. They went to bed, but neither slept. She lay awake, listening. He stared at the ceiling, unable to stop the parade of thoughts, the images, Herbert, broken and pale beneath the earth. What would walk back? What had they called back? Sometimes, he thought, the grave is kinder than the return. He felt constantly anxious about his second wish that he kept thinking and then, at last, near 3 a.m, there came a sound. A knock. Soft. Hesitant. Then another. Firmer. 3 times. Mrs. White bolted upright. He's here, she said. Mr. White froze. The knock echoed again, not violent, not impatient, but undeniably there. No, he breathed. Mrs. White rushed to the stairs. It's him. He called after her, panic rising. You don't know what's behind that door. Mrs. White gasped and turned. It's him. No, Mr. White breathed. No, it can't be. She ran to the door, fumbled with the locks. He's come back. My boy, he's come back. Mr. White rose, panic rising in his chest. He imagined the thing on the other side. Not Herbert, as he had been, alive and laughing and warm, but something pulled from the earth. Something broken. Something wrong. She struggled with the final bolt. He turned, and saw the monkey's paw lying by the fireplace. His hands moved before he could stop himself. He seized it. The knocking came again, louder now. Mrs. White cried out in joy and desperation, I'm coming, my boy. I'm coming. Mr. White lifted the paw. I wish, he gasped, voice thick with terror, I wish him dead. I wish my son dead again, gone. Back. I wish him gone from where he came. The final bolt clicked open. She flung open the door. But there was nothing. No one. Only the road. The wet stone path gleamed under moonlight. The trees whispered in the distance. The gate swung gently in the breeze. She stepped outside, eyes searching the shadows. But there was nothing to find. Behind her, Mr. White lowered the paw. It lay cold and motionless now in his hand, as if it had served the purpose. As if he had done what it was meant to do. To teach those a lesson who tried to alter their destiny. Mrs. White stood in the doorway for a long time. Then slowly, she closed the door and turned to him. Her face hollow. Her hands trembling. And for the first time, she cried. She now knew that nothing on this earth could bring her son back to her. They didn't speak that night. There was nothing left to say. The fire burned low. The house, though warm, felt lifeless. And somewhere beyond the reach of the hearth, the silence deepened, thick and permanent, like the end of a story that had no proper words left. And the monkey's paw rested quietly on the shelf, curled again in sleep, waiting. Always waiting to grant those 3 wishes devastatingly to those who tried to mess with fate. They made no more wishes, dug no more graves, and the house, that quiet house with its fading fire, kept staring down the road, aching for what was taken, and could never come back.